Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harper, as I noted in my opening statement, I'm concerned about financial regulators attempting to impose a climate change agenda, even though financial regulators are not actually environmental regulators and tend not to have expertise in this area. You've had a lot to say about the risks of climate change and extreme weather. You've talked about rising sea levels and extreme weather events. You said recently, and I quote, the NCUA should now focus on the financial risks related to climate change, end quote. In the many decades that credit unions have flourished in this country, all across this big continental nation of ours, as you know, we have extreme weather events every year. They've always happened. They continue to happen. I'm aware of a grand total of one credit union that failed as a result of an extreme weather event, and that was related to Hurricane Katrina, which of course nobody knows whether or to what extent that had anything to do with climate change, but it was certainly a severe hurricane. That particular failure cost the insurance fund, credit union insurance fund, $500,000. Are you aware of any other credit union failures as a result of extreme weather?
I had staff look into this issue. There's a second credit union that also failed after Katrina, and there were a large number that were merged because of declining membership bases as their population.
Do you know how much the second one cost the insurance fund?
I don't know off the top of my head. We will get back to you.
So for a sense of scale here, the $500,000 loss that we know of for the credit union that failed as a result of a storm that may or may not have had anything to do with climate change, that compares to losses to the insurance fund that are unrelated to climate. Do you happen to have any idea how much the insurance fund lost or had payouts that had to make post-2007?
So there was a recent GAO study that said we had lost $1.5 billion on the share insurance fund over, I believe it was the last 15 years, but I would need to double check that.
Yeah, so the figure I have is $2 billion, but maybe we're looking at slightly different periods of time or something like that. I just want to point out that the $2 billion in losses, not the GAO report did not suggest that any of that had anything to do with extreme weather or rising sea levels. Instead, they cited deficiencies in NCUA's oversight and weaknesses at the credit unions themselves in their risk management that had nothing to do with climate. Of course, $2 billion is 4,000 times $500,000. My point in this is that the real risks to the insurance fund, to the credit unions themselves, are the more mundane, ordinary management of their lines of business. And I hope that in your role that's what your focus will be on.
So we as an agency, we should be looking at all material risks. I know that I was talking with a number of our examiners in the wake of Hurricane Ida and how much time they had spent working on disaster recovery plans with the credit unions, urging them to step up. That's part of the all material risks that we should be looking at overall.
Yeah, I just hope you appreciate the scale of this. Let me move on because I've got limited time here. Ms. Pryor, I mentioned during my opening comments that the largest and arguably most successful bank in America got an Ex-Im guarantee to provide financing for the largest airline in Australia and one of the most successful in the world so that they could buy engines from one of the largest industrial companies in the world. Do these companies have access to private capital?
Senator, we look at each of the transactions that come before the board, weigh them against our statutory requirements and XM policies.
I know, I understand, but it's a simple question, though. Yeah. Does Qantas Airline, J.P. Morgan, and General Electric, do they have access to private capital?
One of the policies that we implement on the board is what we call, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, additionality, or crowding in the private sector, to make sure that if private sector financing is available.
So I'll try a third time. Do these three firms have access to private capital?
Senator,
It's not a hard question. I think we both know the
sir,
answer.
It's not, and
Okay.
I can't speak to them. I know that these came before us, that we followed OECD pricing guidelines, that we review all of our internal policies, including those related to
I'm
whether
sure
or not
you
the private
followed
sector
internal
can
policies.
fund
I just wish you
transactions.
could be direct about this. We all know that the largest and most successful firms in the world, in the history of the world, have access to private capital. They can borrow money to buy to buy airplanes and to buy components for airplanes. The only reason they would turn to Exim instead of doing it the way most transactions are done is if they got more favorable terms, which makes my point. The taxpayers are subsidizing these giveaways to these big, very, very successful companies, and clearly displacing private capital. This is a transaction that illustrates that.